Hey guys! So Venice is the jewel of Italy and one of the most recognizable cities in the world. Its unique island location and rich cultural and historical heritage contribute to its incredible popularity among travelers. Venice attracts around 20 million tourists annually, even though its population does not exceed 300,000 people. Venice is situated both on the mainland and on adjacent islands. The island portion of the city, interwoven with picturesque canals, stands literally in the water. This is undeniably beautiful, but at the same time remarkably inconvenient. How were all these buildings constructed? Were they initially built on dry land and later flooded? How does this marvel of a city manage to stay afloat on the water for centuries? What is the sewage system like in Venice? And what are the depths of the Venetian canals? You will learn the answers to all of these questions right now. Constructing Venice required unconventional architectural talent from its builders. In addition to architects, mathematicians also worked on tackling this task, as even the slightest miscalculation in construction could lead to buildings or even the entire city sliding into the water. The first huts on the islands where Venice now stands were built thousands of years ago, while modern Venice is spread across hundreds of islands. The initial settlers of Venice were fleeing from the Veneti in the 5th century AD and built their homes on marshy islands in the lagoon. They used scrap materials and wooden poles. However, these were seen as temporary shelters. A permanent urban settlement was established in the 8th century, and starting from the 9th century, Venice became a hub for transporting luxury goods, such as spices, fabrics, and precious gems, to Europe from the east. Its strategic position on trade routes brought immense wealth to the Venetian Republic, providing ample resources for costly construction on its marshy shores. Wood was imported from northern Italy, and limestone came from Dubrovnik. In areas where the island soils were loose, wooden piles were driven into the ground beneath the buildings, reaching the layer of dense clay. The more massive the building and the deeper the layers of dense soil, the more substantial the piles needed to be. The upper level of the piles was trimmed to create a flat surface, and limestone blocks were laid on this platform to form the stone foundation and the subfloor. Given that boats were traditionally the primary mode of transportation in Venice, shallow canals were carved out to connect the houses. The canal walls were first reinforced with wood and then paved with stone and, more recently, concrete. Most of Venice's modern buildings were constructed after the 16th century, but their foundations are older. That is, the original pile foundations from the 11th to 14th centuries were so sturdy that they could be reused. For example, the San Marco Campanile Tower was built on the site of its predecessor, which burned down in the 15th century. The existing foundation was used for the new tower, and it still holds up perfectly. Venice is often described as having structures supported by wooden piles of a specific type of wood that doesn't deteriorate in water. What is usually referred to is the alpine larch, which supposedly doesn't decay in water, but gets stronger instead. Sometimes, it is even claimed that larches were imported from Siberia. Although many have seen photos of the canals that have shallowed down or have been drained for cleaning with no visible wood piles, archaeological excavations provide evidence that these piles do exist after all. The soils of the islands on which Venice is located do indeed require deep foundations, and importing wood for them was much more convenient and affordable than using stone. This wood could serve as a sturdy base for the structures, provided that the logs were submerged in an oxygen-free environment where they wouldn't decompose. Because, for instance, the so-called briccole, which are wooden pilings driven into the bottom of the Venetian lagoon to indicate waterways, deteriorate quickly and are replaced every 5 to 10 years. Oak pilings, in particular, deteriorate in places where both seawater and air affect the wood. According to images of archaeological excavations, Venice's buildings stand on pile fields. That means the piles were driven closely together, then likely packed tightly with sand and covered with stone to prevent air access to the wood. It is also said that the Venetian lagoon contains special mud, which the local soil is rich in. This mud adheres so tightly to the piles that it cuts off oxygen access, thus protecting them from animals and insects, water corrosion, and natural decay. Thanks to these mud deposits that envelop the piles, they remain intact and undamaged, capable of serving for centuries. Only the upper part of the pile that protrudes into the open space undergoes aging. For instance, there's information that during the construction of the 16th century church of Santa Maria della Salute, 100,000 4-meter wooden beams were driven into the ground. Sometimes tour guides claim that there were 1 million beams, but that might be an exaggeration, as that would probably be too much for a quarter of a hectare occupied by the Basilica della Salute and its adjacent area. The area of the island part of Venice that spreads across 100 islands in the lagoon is about 200 square kilometers. About the same portion of the city is located on the mainland. If we take the data from the Basilica della Salute and calculate how many piles would be required to fill the space for the foundations of buildings standing wall to wall, we end up with seemingly insane numbers, like 8 billion piles. However, Venice isn't just tightly packed buildings. It also includes sidewalks and squares, and some of the small islands are completely uninhabited. Moreover, it's likely that the average Venetian house wouldn't need as many piles in its foundation as a massive church, and the claims about the number of piles under the basilica could have been exaggerated. But even the number of 1 billion piles seems incredibly unbelievable. Are there even that many trees in all of the Alps? Under the Church of San Zaccaria, 15th century, archaeologists have counted a maximum of 7,000 piles. This seems like a more realistic number for a massive building than the hundreds of thousands that local historians mention. Pile fields are used to reinforce the foundations in Venice, but not everywhere. They are used only under large and heavy structures situated on unstable shores, such as the case with the Basilica della Salute. The famous Venetian palazzi along the main canal probably do rest on foundations fortified with numerous piles. However, as for the average Venice houses, if the piles were used in their construction, there definitely weren't as many of them. A characteristic feature of Venetian architecture is the very airy and decorative facades of palazzi that face the canals. This is because many of these palazzi have side and rear load-bearing walls, but not the front ones. This adaptation by the Venetians make their palaces suitable for unstable terrain. To see the depth of the canals in Venice, one just needs to wait for the shallowing period, which has been used for several years now for canal bed cleaning and the restoration of the medieval Venetian palazzi. The canals aren't very deep, reaching up to 2.5 to a maximum of 3 meters in depth. Only the Grand Canal reaches a depth of 6 meters in some places. Its length is 3,800 meters, and its width ranges from 30 to 70 meters. It has almost no embankments. They are replaced by the building facades. Looking at all these canals in Venice, another question arises. Most people familiar with how the regular sewage systems work wonder about the sewage system in Venice, especially in its old part situated on the water. The conventional layout of pipelines is impossible there because there is no solid ground, making the construction of a traditional network unfeasible. Indoor plumbing lines remain the same, but what about exterior systems? That is unclear. Additionally, the question of waste disposal and treatment also arises. Is waste simply discharged into the sea or somehow purified, removing harmful and aggressive components? The sewage system in Venice is unique and meticulously designed. It's important to remember that the city consists of numerous islands located in the Adriatic Sea. These islands are separated by channels and artificial canals. The system is very well designed, as all wastewater is directed into the lagoon. Additionally, almost all small canals can be closed off and drained for timely cleaning of accumulated silt and debris. Thus, the water in all of the city's canals is clean, and there are no unpleasant odors in the city. Many tourists staying in seaside hotels in Italy have experienced this firsthand. Strolling along Venice's waterfronts, one can only sense the pleasant aroma of the sea breeze, filled with freshness and the scent of algae. The canals here are very clean. Children swim in them, and fish and crabs can also be found there. The city's sewage system operates as follows. Each apartment has a toilet and wastewater pipes. Human waste and household effluents go into septic tanks located beneath each building. A hydraulic gate connects the septic tank reservoir to small channels through which the wastewater is transported. Each channel has a special filter and sedimentation basin at its exit. Because sewage undergoes filtration through the filters, relatively clean water enters the canal. Moreover, the water undergoes several stages of purification. The establishment of the system, the organization of the work of special boats that collect waste, and repair work in the basements of city buildings required a significant amount of funds to be allocated by the authorities. After settling in the sedimentation basin, the almost clean water flows into the Grand Canal, which is actually a natural channel between the Venetian islands. At this point, nature takes over. Thanks to the phenomena of tides, which occur twice a day, a portion of the water from the lagoon flows out into the open sea. Natural passages serve as conductors, transporting the water, and the sandy bottoms act as natural filters. Sometime later, the water returns with the tide, but in a cleansed state. Therefore, tourists staying in hotels near Venice don't experience any discomfort. This natural breathing strongly resembles our own respiration, when we inhale air, filling our lungs with clean oxygen, and then exhale used carbon dioxide. Well, that's all for today, friends. Give this video a thumbs up if you found it interesting, let me know what you learned in the comments, and we'll see you next time.